May 25th, 1977. I run away from home with Jim Jones. We had moved from Odessa, Florida to Sissonville, West Virginia. My mother had always been my best friend and confidant, but one day before work she was incensed and accused me of having sex with the young man I was dating. His name escapes me. I was having sex with others, just not him, and I felt the need to protect his honor, so a verbal fight ensued. It was our first fight. She was leaving for work and said, "When I get home, I don't want to see your face." I thought she meant ever. So when an old boyfriend from Tampa, who I'd met at the Sweetheart Roller Skating Rink, called out of the blue and said that he'd gone AWOL from the Army in DC and was headed to Tampa, I said I'd go with him. I packed 2 grocery bags with my clothes and left. I didn't leave a note because I didn't think my mother ever wanted to see or hear from me again. My brother Chuck was 9 and saw me go, but didn't know Jim Jones, nor to think to note the car or the tag. Maybe that's why he became a cop later in life. I wonder. I'm writing from the future and am fuzzy on the exact dates and places, but what I recall is that we went to Tampa, where his mother convinced him to go back to the Army rather than be court-martialed. We drove back to DC, but he chickened out when it came to turning himself in. I worked every job I could get, mostly waitressing, and we took an apartment at the Grosvenor Apartments in Bethesda, Maryland. We missed paying the rent, and they locked us out and threw away my clothes. Looking back, I don't know who owned the green 70 model Toyota Corona we were driving, because Jim didn't have a driver's license and I didn't own a car, but that's what we had. I was gone for months, and my parents had an APB out on me in 5 states before they were able to contact me. I forget how they did. Jim Jones was a 6'4", 250-pound mutant drug addict who routinely beat me within an inch of my life. No matter how hard I worked, it was never enough to support his habits. Sometimes I would be out of work for weeks because I couldn't be serving food with blackened, swollen eyes and bloodied lips. I worked in DC for a while and then worked bars in restaurants in Charleston, West Virginia, including the Cabaret, Athens by Night, and the Holiday Inn. There were a lot more because I couldn't prove I was 18 since I was only 15. I worked in a breakfast room mornings, served lunch and dinner at a Greek restaurant, and then worked until 2 a.m. serving drinks in bars until they'd figure out that I was underage and I'd have to move on to the next bar. Eventually, I was able to earn enough to rent an unheated garage. It had a toilet, a sink, and bathtub, but no water to run them, as it was via a garden hose I ran in through a broken window. There was no air conditioning, no fan, and only the heat of one small space heater that I bought. One night, thinking I would freeze to death, I fell asleep too close to the heater and caught my hair on fire. The clothes I left home with hung on my skeletal frame now, as I had been reduced to just skin and bones. I used an old rope for a belt, and even my shoes were too big now and caused blisters on my feet, as I had to walk to and from all of my places of work in Charleston, West Virginia. Jim had a bad drug habit and a nasty temper, and whenever the two mixed, I was caught in the crossfire. I was always on guard to dodge a swing from a punch that would knock the wind out of me. He beat me with a bed rail one time so severely that I couldn't go back to work for weeks because I was so badly bruised. As he swung the rail and hit the concrete walls of the garage we lived in, he had knocked huge, gaping holes in the concrete. It was a constant reminder to me of how much it hurt to be on his bad side. As scary as it was to be with him, I believed that it was better than the alternative. I had seen the brutality men could use to crush someone as innocent as I had been, and at least there was only one of Jim to deal with. Jim was the constant validation of my belief that I was unworthy. We took in a boarder to help share the cost of the flat. He was an affable, red-headed gay guy, and I really enjoyed him. I never did drugs, but one night I was too sick to go out and get cigarettes, so he said to help myself from his pack. I thought the cigarette was pretty odd looking, as it looked like it had been handmade, but I didn't want to take one of his good ones, so I took the ratty looking one. After smoking it, the pile of tissues on the floor around me began to transform into dinosaurs, and I thought I must be so sick that I was delusional. I told him what was going on, and he about died laughing, because the cigarette I had pulled from the pack was marijuana laced with something else. I forget what. Lesson learned, and I never tried drugs after that. He kept telling me that I should get away from Jim before he killed me. I think he gave me the strength to do what I did next. Jim wanted to go to Disney World and to see his mom, so we drove to Florida in the Toyota. It had been impounded for an unpaid parking ticket, and I'd just been able to pay its bail. I didn't know the car was impounded. I just knew that I came out to the street one night at 3 a.m. and it was gone. I thought it had been stolen. I don't remember how I found out it was in the impound lot, but by the time I did, there were hundreds of dollars to pay in storage fees. I was driving us there through San Antonio, Florida. Jim was drunk and was all over the steering wheel and blocking my vision. With one arm, I was trying to push him back into his seat so that I could see as I ran a stop sign and was hit broadside. The Mercury Cougar that hit us was later reported to have been traveling in excess of 60 miles per hour. Drunks seem to never be the victims in auto accidents, and Jim was no exception. He walked away without a scratch once he woke up from his stupor. I went through the windshield and broke my neck. I remember getting up and dragging the front bumper of the Cougar out of the road as I went around to the passenger side and made sure the little old lady was okay, and then around to the driver's side to check on the little old man. He had hit the steering wheel pretty hard, but was able to speak. What happened next was like the opening scene from the movie The Gladiator. When I saw that movie, I was awestruck at how it looked exactly as it had looked to me all of those years ago. I walked out into a field of tall grass. The sun was shining, the wind was blowing softly through my hair as I reached out with both hands to lightly touch the top of the weaving strands of grass. Everything was silent, and then it went white. I woke up in a hospital, unable to move. I was paralyzed, and Jim was telling me he didn't want the doctors to know who I was because he was still on the run from the army. I remembered 2 doctors standing over me, x-rays in hand, telling me I would never walk again because my neck was broken in 3 places. The only hope I would have of even sitting up in a wheelchair was if they fused a steel rod up through my spine. They obviously didn't know that I was just a child. I had gotten my first marriage proposal at the age of 12 and always looked a lot older. I laid there thinking, this cannot be my life. I can't be paralyzed. This can't be happening to me. I suspect most people go through that denial, but I just wouldn't give in to the reality. I had learned from previous efforts that you just can't give up. No matter how big and bad the odds are stacked against you, you absolutely cannot give up. Being young and ignorant, I didn't know what these doctors could legally do to me, but I wasn't going to take my chances of waking up and finding that some surgery had left me incapable of ever getting past this paralysis. I believed I could heal myself, but not if I had a metal rod installed through my spine. Jim and his friends from the band. Jim had said the band's name was Creedence Clearwater Revival, but I find that hard to believe in retrospect. They came and whisked me out in a wheelchair without telling anyone. I spent what seemed an eternity at his parents' home, unable to walk and only able to drag myself across the room. But I dragged myself a lot. I wouldn't call my family. I didn't think that I was welcome there anymore. Jim's parents didn't want to be held responsible for what their son's action had caused and didn't want the army to find their son, so they were happy to hide me and my affliction. My grandfather, Floyd Norris, Big Daddy, through a miraculous chain of events, somehow found out where I was and got me to a chiropractor who soon had me walking again. My dad gave me a chartreuse Mazda station wagon, and I drove Jim and I back to West Virginia. J. Rockefeller became governor of West Virginia. I learned that he had sold all of the state's planes and bought helicopters, but none of the pilots, including my dad, could fly helicopters. I decided to go to work for Rockefeller as a way to bring him down politically for what cost my family their livelihood. The job I applied for was actually working in the Office of Business, Economic, and Community Development, but I figured once inside I could pretty quickly get moved wherever I'd have the best vantage point. I didn't tell my parents why I wanted to work for the state, and because I was a minor, they had to sign off on me getting a work permit to take the position. My parents moved to Tampa and moved into a very small 2-bedroom apartment near USF. I stayed in Charleston and, as I planned, quickly moved from the Office of Business, Economic, and Community Development to take the position of secretary to the secretary of Governor Rockefeller. By this time, my desire to expose him had waned, since my father was on course to do something else in Tampa and wouldn't be restored to his former job. I did the best work I could for the governor. I only failed him once, and I thought it was pretty ingenious. My job was to research anyone he'd be meeting with and put together a full dossier on everything there was to know about them and a photo. Governor Rockefeller was meeting with Senator Byrd, and no one could provide me with a photo, but everyone said, "He looks like Robert Redford." I built out the dossier and included the photo of Redford. I remember Governor Rockefeller bellowing from behind his desk, "Stairs! Get in here!" We got a pretty good laugh out of it when I explained, and later, 40 years later, I was able to share that story with Senator Byrd. All the waitressing and bar jobs I'd had before were very short-term because I was underage and I had no Social Security card. Working for the governor, I had to get a Social Security number and had made a couple of attempts but kept being shut down. Finally, I walked into the office of the guy who appeared to be calling the shots, took off my huge black velvet coat and completely covered his desk and all of the work piled on it. I then climbed on top of the coat and said I wasn't leaving until I had a number and a card. I got the card that day. It's just a little paper business card size thing with a number typed on it, but that's what I've used my whole life, so I guess it's real. It appears that happened in 1977, as that's when the government began to track my wages.